Good morning. I am Marcos Regalado, member of the Board of Directors of the Latin American and Caribbean Presidential Mission. On behalf of the Presidential Mission, it is my pleasure to welcome you today to today's half-day forum titled Prospects for Greater Economic and Cultural Engagements, Latin America, USA, Asia Pacific region. The forum will consist of two sessions. Session 1, titled Model of Economic Freedom in the Asia Pacific region, and Session 2, titled Strategic Geopolitical Green Cooperation. Each session is intended to last approximately 1.5 hours. Between sessions, please feel free to enjoy a 15-minute coffee break. We only ask that you return to your seats as soon as possible after the break so as not to delay the start of session 2. Throughout the program, we will be recognizing our moderators, panelists, and members of the audience who are joining us today. However, I would be remiss if I did not No, there it is. Okay. I would be remiss if I did not mention that were it not for the active participation of persons who at some point reached the highest office in their respective countries and guided its destinies, often under very challenging circumstances. Over 30 former presidents have participated in our activities. Today, we have the pleasure of listening to former Presidents Vinicio Cerezo from Guatemala, Jamil Mawat from Ecuador, and Jorge Tuto Quiroga from Bolivia. We are also fortunate to have Senator Gustavo Leite from the Republic of Paraguay, Admiral Cibar Benitez, Permanent Secretary of Paraguay's National Defense Council, Mr. Charles Cho, Director General of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, and other panelists who will be properly introduced by our moderators. Throughout the program, you will note that our panelists and moderators bring a wealth of experience and institutional knowledge to the topics at hand. I would now like to introduce Mr. Thomas Field, President of the Presidential Mission Project, or as we sometimes call him, the President of the Presidents.
Thank you, Marcos. It's a very humbling title to have here. I'm really happy to be here today, everyone, and it's a privilege to be in Coral Gables, Florida, at this Latin American and Caribbean Presidential Mission Forum, surrounded by so many esteemed friends and distinguished guests. Thank you all for coming. Originally, this was envisioned as a very small gathering of just a few people to talk about the same topics, but little by little, driven by the growing interest in the strengthening of the bonds across Latin America, the USA, and the Asia Pacific region, it's evolved into something much greater, more significant. I'd like to reiterate what Marcos was saying and extend a special welcome to our former presidents, Vinicio Cerezo from Guatemala, and Jamil Mawat from Ecuador, and Jorge Tuto Quiroga from Bolivia. They've been really pillars in the Latin American Presidential Mission Project that was founded 12 years ago here in Florida, actually. And actually in Atlanta, we founded it, but we set up our headquarters here. But they've been rock solid from the beginning, and we're really grateful to have you here. Thank you very much. Also, as Marco said, to have the senator from Paraguay. He's also a former Minister of Industry and Commerce and a very, very good friend of the U.S., of Asia, of Taiwan. And so we're really happy that you came here to be with us. And as Marcos mentioned, Ciber Benitez, who's a dear friend. He's also a core member of the Institute Patria Soñada, which also sponsors the presidential mission in Paraguay. And we're really grateful to have you here today also. Thank you. I also want to express a heartfelt thank you to some of the other people I see here, all friends, but Alexander Telfor, he's a Haitian leader who's working to build a grassroots network of moral and innovative leaders throughout Haiti to try to turn around that terrible situation that we all know about. But he's a relentless fighter. He's here. Where is he? Over here. Thank you for coming. Yeah. If Haiti has hope to somehow turn things around, he's a key person for that. And I'm really, really happy you could be here. Also, I want to thank our partners, the Global Peace Foundation, the Esquipulas Foundation, and Fondeco, both of Guatemala. As I mentioned, the Institute Patria Soñada and the Chaco Vivo project of the Ateneo Company in Paraguay, which you'll hear about more in the second session. Also, C3 Solutions, another organization that's working with us very closely out of Washington, D.C., and the World Affairs Council, which is led by Aaron Rolson here. We're really grateful that you came and look forward to working with you more in the future. If you haven't noticed, the two main countries represented here today, besides the USA, are Paraguay and Guatemala. These countries share many commonalities, two of which are central to today's forum. First, they are the only Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America that actually recognize and have ties with the Republic of China, Taiwan. So we're going to be discussing that in the first panel. And the other country that is not Spanish-speaking, but is Belize. But Paraguay and Guatemala are the two key allies to Taiwan in Latin America. And second, these two countries, their leadership in sustainable initiatives, such as RED Plus projects and other projects for the climate and ecological protection of the environment, exemplifies our forum's theme, prospects for greater economic and cultural engagements, Latin America, USA, Asia-Pacific region. And they will be in the second session talking about the really exciting projects in Paraguay, in Guatemala, and the potential for all Latin America and for connections with the USA and the Asia-Pacific region. Last year, I traveled to Taipei with several of you who are here to discuss these same topics with the top Taiwanese leaders, including Taiwan's new U.S. envoy in Washington, Alexander Lui. Having today Director General Charles Chow of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office with us is also a very great honor, and together with part of his team. So thank you very much, Charles. As we explored opportunities in our two sessions for collaboration, I hope all of you will meet new friends and make valuable connections that can extend beyond the forum, and that we can follow up with you afterwards. So I hope you've registered when you came in so we know who's here and we can follow up with you later on. Now it's my honor to introduce a very distinguished leader and a dear friend of mine, the former President Vinicio Cerezo of Guatemala. He was the principal architect of the Esquipulas Accords 1 and 2 that brought peace to Central America in the late 1980s, early 1990s. He's a tireless fighter for integration, especially Central America. He founded the Esquipulas Foundation for the Integration of Central America, which he's been leading for many years, doing tremendous work in Guatemala with his assistant, Olinda Salguero, who will be moderating one of our sessions here today. And he was also from 217 to 221, I think. He was the Secretary General of the Integration System of Central America, known as SICA. So he's been a real tremendous fighter for peace, a respected elder statesman. And just last year, he was honored by the Global Peace Foundation with their Lifetime Achievement Award at the convention that we had in Manila, Philippines. So please welcome everyone to the stage, President Vinicio Cerezo.
Queridos y queridas amigas, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's both a pleasure and an honor to welcome you to this event. Prospect for greater economic and cultural engagements, Latin America and USA, Asia-Pacific region. This event seeks to explore and enhance the myriad of opportunities that exist between diverse regions, focusing on both economic and cultural dimensions. To set the stage, let me briefly introduce the importance of the Latin American Presidential Mission, an initiative that symbolizes our collective commitment to fostering deeper international cooperation. The mission embodies a strategic coalition of former heads of state and influential leaders from across Latin America, who advocate for sustainable development and enhanced economic ties. This initiative plays a pivotal role in promoting regional interests on the global stage, facilitating dialogues and forging partnerships and transcend borders. Today, we are gathered here to build on this foundation. The economic landscape of Latin America intertwined with the dynamic markets of the USA and the Asia-Pacific, presents unique opportunities for collaboration, from joint ventures in technology and innovation to partnerships in cultural projects. Our potential for mutual growth is immense. Moreover, cultural engagement stands as a cornerstone of our discussion. Understanding and appreciating our diverse heritage and values can significantly enhance our economic interactions, creating a more profound and resilient bond. As we embark on these discussions today, it is essential to recognize the strategic importance of Latin America in the global arena. This region, which its rich natural resources, vibrant cultures, and rapidly growing economies, is not merely a participant on the world stage, but a key driver of global economic stability and innovation. Latin America's influence extends beyond commodities. It's a cradle of biodiversity and powerhouse of renewable energy potential, which are critical components in addressing global challenges such as climate change and sustainable development. By harnessing this potential, we can lead initiatives that not only propel the region forward, but also contribute significantly to global progress and resilience. Let us ensure that our collaboration reflects the significant role Latin America plays in creating a sustainable and prosperous global future. As we proceed with today's sessions, let us keep in mind the broader vision of the Latin American Presidential Mission. Let's leverage this platform to initiate meaningful conversations, exchange ideas, and outline actionable strategies that will lead to prosperous and sustainable growth. Thank you for your presence and your commitment to see this enriching dialogue. Let's make the most of this incredible opportunity to shape a brighter, more interconnected future. Thank you very much.
I was just informed that Congressman Jimenez will not be able to be here. He missed his flight from France because he was there for the D-Day commemoration. So he's taking a flight this morning, and obviously cannot be here this morning with us, but he sends his apologies. Our first moderator is an expert on economic freedom. Mr. Anthony Kim is Research Fellow in Economic Freedom. He's the editor of the Index of Economic Freedom published by the Heritage Foundation and manager of global engagement for the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Previously, Mr. Kim had served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Dr. Edwin Fulner, founder of the Heritage Foundation. And it is not a coincidence that you find the word freedom in everything that Mr. Kim does. So I would like to ask Mr. Kim to come up and also the panelists for session 1.
Well, good morning, Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, Kenjo, Kian, Grace, everybody. I'm Anthony Kim. This is a very risky first panel because this is a wonderful Friday, and we are not here to ruin your Friday. We want to give you very nice motivations and inspiration and good booster shot, real meaningful booster shot. So I'm really delighted, humbled by your very presence here in this wonderful Friday. And this is our journey together. This is not just a one-time occasion. Hey, you have a time? Why don't you come to Miami and let's talk about a few things? That is not what we are doing here. This is the beginning of our greater journey together. Here, I noticed that we say stronger together. No doubt. And the forum, the presidential mission, I especially thank Mr. Thomas Field for putting together this very timely, strategic, practical conversations. We are not here to lecture you, obviously. So within our 90-minute or so time frame, we want to share very important, diverse perspectives. Why Taiwan matters, why Paraguay's relationship, Guatemala's relationship with Taiwan matter. And we want to be very practical. We are not here to talk about just pure political dimensions and diplomatic dimensions. We want to do more than just talking. We want to make things happen together. But if I may, before I invite our first distinguished speaker, allow me to entertain you, hopefully, within 1 minute, 37 seconds. You can time this. So nowadays, we talk a lot about AI. Everybody kind of heard about AI, right? Without really maybe understanding. I don't really understand, but I know the importance of AI. Economic importance, foreign policy, social, and even, political importance, because there's a competition going on concerning AI. But what I want to talk about is, as important as AI, we should keep in mind 3 I's. First I is ideas. We need good ideas, not bad ideas. We need good ideas to conserve and advance. I think that's why we're here today. First I is ideas. And second I is institutions. institutions matter. I mean, look at our partner organizations here today. Presidential Mission and friends from Guatemala, friends from Washington. Without institutions, without functioning civil society, how can we make things happen? How can we stand stronger together? So we need institutions. The final I is individuals, like you and me and our distinguished panelists. Without individuals like us, like people, real people, like-minded, willing partners, wherever they may be, we need good people, good ideas, so that we can create and make our civil societies flourish. That's why freedom matters. That's why, if I may, Taiwan matters. Because Taiwan is the embodiment of that representation. 3 I's, good ideas, good institutions, good individuals. This year happens to be something called TRA, Taiwan Relations Act 45th anniversary. This is a very important legislation defining America's engagement with Taiwan. We just celebrated. Taiwan now has a new president as of May 20th. So a lot going on around the world. And more than ever, if I may, I think 3 I's are very important, perhaps as much as AI, or maybe even more important than AI. So with that, we're going to start real conversation. So I'm just a moderator. So I'm going to invite our first distinguished speaker, former president of Bolivia, Jorge Quiroga. Mr. President, he really knows what's going on around the world. He was not only president, but he really understands what's going on in different parts of the world, including the United States. He has a degree from University of Texas A&M. He knows Texas. He spent some quality time there. And also he knows Washington, D.C., because he worked with International Monetary Fund and World Bank and all others. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite President Jorge Quiroga to ask you to share your perspectives, why we're here, and what do you see in terms of this evolving global landscape. Mr. President?
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you to the fellow panelists, Evan, Federico, Gustavo. Thanks, Jamil, Vinicio, for inviting us here. Thomas, all organizations, Marcos, for hosting us here. Thomas has a very important title. He's the president of a lot of former presidents, but even better, he's the partner of Olinda Salguero, who's the one that gets us all around here. But thanks and regards to you for this. Great organization, Thomas, except the next time you should have planned a little better. July 14th was the best date to do an event in Miami. That is the day of the America Soccer Cup final here in Miami. Bolivia, Ecuador, we're going to play, right, Jamil? Dreams shall never die, they say. That would have been a better time. But it's a pleasure, Marcos, to be here in Miami, the home of the best soccer team of over 35-year-olds in the world, the Inter Miami with Messi and Suarez and all the rest of these great players. Let's give it up for Inter Miami and Messi. Some tickets maybe for the next go-round. Here, Anthony, let me talk broadly about 3 things, or 2 things and a conclusion. First, democracy, migration, criminality for the region. Second, trade, technology, and finance, real quick. And then what is the future for Latin America vis-a-vis the Pacific? First, on democracy, migration, criminality, I'm not trying to artificially lump them all together, but they do belong together because we are part of a region, Latin America, that since 9/11, 2001, and it forever will be the second most relevant thing that happened that day for obvious reasons, in Lima, we signed the charter that said we all commit to living with free elections, independent institutions, freedom of the press. Europe and Latin America are the only 2 regions that have those clauses. You don't find that in Africa or Asia, so we're supposed to live up to that. There was one exception on September 2001, Cuba. Unfortunately, the list of exceptions is getting longer. Venezuela, Nicaragua, and many of us on the waiting list to join the club of non-democratic actors. And I think that is important to keep in mind when we look towards the future on what's going to happen in Venezuela on July 28th. And when you don't have democracy and solid institutions, you get crime running galore. Cocaine, we make a lot of coca in Bolivia, Peru, they get the cocaine. You get Tren de Araguas, you get criminality, chapos, carteles, and what have you running around. And then there's the logical reaction is, let's build a wall, let's keep the criminals out, let's keep the migrants that are committing crimes out of our country, because though they come together. And migration, which used to be a phenomenon driven by economic necessity from poorer Latin American countries, then moved to, I want to leave this because it's not safe in Salvador or Guatemala, Honduras, to what you have now. I want to flee Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, with very well thought out mechanisms where you can see how it works. Correa in Ecuador would give visa-free entries to people from Cuba that come to Ecuador, cross the Darien, up to the north and migrate. Nicaragua is doing the exact same thing now. So it is not exaggerated to say that migration, criminality, and democracy all are intertwined, and we live and suffer through that. Now in that, my last comment on this democracy thing is that Venezuela is ground zero and the inflection point that will determine if the region will, moving forward, be what we signed up to in the Inter-American Democratic Charter, all democracies everywhere, or will we become another hybrid region where democracy is optional? People forget the Summit of the Americas in LA, there was a lot of discussion about Cuba participating in Venezuela as if the membership requirement was mere regional contiguity or proximity. No, it was supposed to be, I have to be a democracy to belong to this club and be part of the Americas, and that is getting lost, and that will be decided in Venezuela on July 28th. Many of you probably know or have heard of Maria Corina Machado, good friend from a long time, fellow engineer, very systematic, very organized, charismatic, eloquent, and the toughest human being that you'll ever know. She is the most important political leader in Latin America today, everybody included. She's the most important one because it's in her hands to be able to drive the people forward to have an election. And it's important to have Venezuela become a democracy again. It is important in terms of criminality and bad stuff to free Venezuela from being occupied territory. It is occupied today by the sheriff with a C and a double H. Cuba, Hezbollah, Hamas, ELN, Russia, Iran, FARC, the sheriff. They have occupied Venezuela and they're dismembering that country. If you want it to be a democracy, if you want it to be a haven for energy production and not to host and a sanctuary for bad people, it is important that we go through that in Venezuela. The reality is, what can the government do to steal this one more time? I don't want to be too overly optimistic, but it seems to me like the options of jailing or burying Maria Corina or Edmundo do not seem to be on the cards. Somebody from Guyana is here, maybe creating a skirmish with Guyana to create the third global flashpoint, maybe in the cards. We have to be at the ready, but it is critical. All I can say is, if we have elections on July 28th because of Maria Corina and Edmundo and everything that's happening, I am absolutely sure that no matter how unfair the conditions are, Venezuela will sing to the world their anthem, which goes, Gloria al bravo pueblo que el yugo lanzó. I think they will throw off the yoke come July 28th. Quickly to trade and technology and finance, and the relationship of Latin America with Asia and the role of Taiwan in all this. Jamil and I lived through what's called the lost half economic decade of Latin America, 98-2003. CEPAL, the economic think tank of the UN, wrote about it, we suffered it, the lost half decade of Latin America. That was soon followed by the golden decade, 2004-2014. What changed? The voracious appetite for energy, food, and minerals from China, buying from South America in particular, coal from Colombia, oil from Venezuela, copper from Chile, iron from Brazil, soybeans from Argentina, zinc, tin, lead from Bolivia. They were buying it at increasing prices at higher volumes. And it was a good decade economically. Fiscal coffers got filled out, and it dramatically changed that. That the future is China is slowing down, India is rising, there could be another wave of Indian demand across the Pacific. What this has created in South America is that your hearts are in one place, aligned with democracies as I described, but your pockets are with Asia, where it's not all good democracies around the area. And this is best exemplified in Uruguay. Some of you may have seen or heard Luis Alberto Lacalle Pou, fourth generation right-wing president, genetically codified to be a Democrat, open market type of person. And right now he's queued up to sign a free trade agreement with China, because the unfortunate reality is that the US and the US Congress is not open for trade business, and the EU, forget about the EU, Mercosur and the EU have had the longest dating game in the history of trade negotiations, 25 years. And there's no ring, no wedding ring, no marriage, nothing on the trade, and this is with Mercosur. So that is the reality of what's happening vis-a-vis trade. So that is a factor that you should keep in mind. And I understand China, do you like their system? No, but they are the #1 or #2 trade partner for every country in South America. They lent a lot of money for corrupt projects. Now they cannot be paid back. So it'll be interesting to see that China's move from debtor to creditor and how they handle the negotiations in the Paris Club will be something to see. But I want to close with a technology and the world that we're moving to up towards the future. And the world of chips, and not potato chips, but the Taiwanese chips, and consumer electronics, and green mobility, and green communication. The world that is coming, it'll dramatically be different as we move ahead. I was a young IBM systems engineer in the 80s. IBM invented the PC, Apple had the PC, first wave of technology, the 80s, the 90s internet, 2007 the iPhones and the Androids, and now we're in the midst of the AI, as you mentioned, revolution coming up ahead. I remember, because of work that I do, that I heard about what was happening with AI and the evolution of this on a day that I'm sure most people that I know knew exactly where they were. I heard there's this new product coming out, this AI, ChatGPT. November 26, 2022, I heard about that. I hanged up the phone. I said, don't bother me with this AI things. Messi was about to be eliminated in Qatar in the World Cup. That's the day that they were about to be sent home, 0-0 at halftime. Then they scored the goal, they survived. And they played Poland next, November 30th. That's the day that ChatGPT came out, by the way, if you want a little trivia factoid. And then the world is going to be dramatically different as we move ahead. In this regard, I think people do not understand the amazing necessity and dependence on Taiwanese products and companies. Everybody knows in the US, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Tesla. Maybe many have heard about Chinese Huawei's, Alibaba's, Tencent, BYD's, and what have you, but very few know, or not as many know, about Foxconn and TSMC. Two companies from Taiwan. Without these companies, the world would not work. Without Foxconn and TSMC, the world would cease to function. Foxconn makes almost half of the consumer electronics in the world. If I go to my backpack, I have an iPad, I have an iPod for running, I have a Kindle for reading, and if you have a Xiaomi or you have a Pixel, or if you have EVs, it requires the Foxconn manufacturing that comes from this company in Taiwan that is essential. And if you want to talk about chips, without TSMC, there's no, but everybody knows about Apple, NVIDIA, so Qualcomm, ARM, AMD, everything is manufactured by TSMC, the most important chip company in the world. So the idea that there could be trouble there is just to live in a world without chips or without consumer electronics, so you understand the importance of what that is. So I'll close with the following. As we move towards the next few decades, I think for Latin America, you will find more and more the trade relationships will be more with the Pacific than it used to be with the Atlantic. In the 20th century, you wanted to be in the Atlantic. You wanted to go to Europe. You wanted to go to US. Now it will be more and more every day to the Pacific, where China is, where India is, where South Korea is, where Japan is. Technology will be very dependent and extremely reliant on what happens on Taiwan and that part of the world. But do not forget that in the end also, some eternal principles are in play, and we are going to decide if, moving ahead, we will have a region full of democracies, the point I started with, moving up ahead, or will we revert and go back to being a hybrid region? That is in play in Venezuela. I wish all my Venezuelan friends the best of luck. It was a Venezuelan 200 years ago, or more than 200 years ago, that got up on his horse, traversed the Andes, came to Ecuador, came to Bolivia, gave us freedom. Now maybe if the Venezuelans have success on July 28th, maybe Bolivar or his spirit will get on the horse, which is Facebook and Instagram and TikTok now, and move north and help free Nicaragua and Cuba as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that was very straightforward, candid, presentation, which remind me of the President of Guatemala, former President of Guatemala, Benicio Cerezo's opening remarks. It's all about, connectivity, transparency, accountability, and democracy. And once again, I think that's why Taiwan matters, because Taiwan is a well-functioning free market democracy, unlike it's a big northern neighbor of the country. Now, I'm very excited about our next speaker. He's now a politician, but I'm a big fan of this politician. I'm talking about our dear friend from Asunción, Paraguay, Senator Gustavo Leite. I first met him when he was a Minister of Commerce and Industry years ago. Then we kept in touch, and then he came to Heritage Foundation last October with the President Santiago Peña, and he's doing a lot of interesting and real stuff. So I'd like to invite Senator Leite to share his perspective, especially in the context of Taiwan, Paraguay, and Taiwan, because he's really one of those doers, and he's been to Taiwan a few times, and he's going again soon. So, Senator.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Anthony, and distinguished guests. I think everybody was already saluted many times. I won't repeat the names, but being before this great auditorium brings me to the idea of speaking about three things. First, a little bit about me. Second, a little bit about the relationship of my country, Paraguay, with Taiwan. And third, a little bit about, what is the name of the conference? The prospect for greater economic, the role of the U.S. in the prospect of economic engagement in Latin America. And I also, at the last part of my presentation, I'd like to speak a little bit about fake news and checking fake news. First of all, I'm not the typical politician. You won't hear from me things that typical politicians try to do it political right way. I'm not a right way politician because I'm not a politician. I am a businessman who has been invited many times into politics, and I try to do it with the tranquility of my conscience in trying to be of service to my country. And I served in many positions. Now as senator by accident, because the current president of Paraguay and the former president of Paraguay, Horacio Cartes, invited me at a luncheon and said, "We need people like you in Congress." And I said, "There is no way you're gonna need somebody like me in Congress because I'm too blunt." And they said, "No, that's exactly what we need. Our party needs a menu like a restaurant where you have typical politicians, right-wing politicians, left-wing politicians, and no politicians at all." So that's what I'm here. Second, I think we are about to see the time in which Paraguay and other, Guatemala, who were the outcast, totally wrong to have relationships with Taiwan, to be the beacon who for over 60 years did the right thing. The world is starting to recognize that. And I remember a story, and President Quiroga, I like that you brought the fact of Foxconn. In
2017, we were celebrating the 60th anniversary of a diplomatic relationship between Paraguay and Taiwan. President Cartes sent me 2 days prior to meet Terry Gao, who was not in Taiwan, but his second in command, Fang Minglu, received me at the research facility of Foxconn. And of course, I was a very blunt minister, and I said, we want to manufacture, assemble iPhones in Paraguay. And Fan Minglu looked at me and said, how many engineers who speak English and Mandarin, trained in electronics, in industrial processes, and so on. And I looked at him and I said, I'll come back and see you in 5 years. And President Carter arrived the day before, the 11th, because the 12th of July we were I remember this. He got out of the Emirates plane and said, how did it go? And I said, good and bad. What do you mean good and bad? Well, bad because we have no chance at all of inviting Foxconn now. But if we speak to President Tsai Ing-wen, then we can enhance our educational collaboration. Let's ask her an MIT, because she went to MIT. The MIT of Latin America with Taiwanese cooperation in Paraguay. The day after the celebration at the Bay of Kaohsiung, we still discuss with President Cartes if it took President Tsai 1 or 2 seconds to say, done. When we presented her the project of the Paraguayan Taiwanese University. Now we have the third cohort of engineers who speak Mandarin, who speak English, who were trained for 5 semesters in Paraguay and 3 semesters in Taiwan by Taiwan Tech. We have Asian-style engineers in Paraguay. Recently, President Peña announced the first factory of electric buses by a Taiwanese company in Paraguay. And now we're in a position to go back to Foxconn and say, hey, we're ready. Look at us. And yes, we would like to use our energy to be the backup for peacetime for Taiwan in terms of semiconductors. And we're working on that, and we'll keep pounding doors, and I think we have a strong message. But the Paraguayan politicians who, by fake news, used to sell themselves to the Taiwanese gold are replacing now the other politicians from other part of Latin America who sold themselves, in some cases, to the Chinese gold, to the mainland Chinese gold. And that's what's happening in Latin America. So our relationship with Taiwan is based on values, democratic values. It's based on what we see of Taiwan. I visited Taiwan in 1992 for the first time. In July, I'll be there for the 14th time. And I see a country that, based on freedom, democracy, free market economics, goes forward and goes forward and goes forward. And I see another country that is colonialist, is ruthless with its friends, and to my liking, is not doing any good in Latin America. It owns all the oil and gas of Argentina and of Venezuela and so on, and I don't know how they're going to get away with it. That's the second part of my presentation. The third part, I wanted to talk about the role of the U.S. And since I told you I'm not a typical politician, Mr. Ellis, please don't expect to speak good about what the U.S. has been doing in our part of the region for the last 10 years, but there is a chance. If we don't have a leader of the free world that is strong, that shows you where we go, what do you expect? It's like our negotiations of Mercosur. I recently was in Brasilia with the president of the Brazilian Congress, and as President Quiroga said, Mercosur and the European Union is a lost case. And I said to the president of the Brazilian Congress, Mr. Pacheco, what do you make of the 1115 resolution of the European Union, which basically says that we have to be check and counter-check for deforested deforested pasture that could be having a harvest coming and doing a whole process of certification to sell to Europe? And I said, and the Chinese? Who is polluting the world? Paraguay, that has a positive carbon print, or China? Why us? So that's where we need a strong leader, like Brazil, to lead. I said to them, you lead the negotiations, we'll go behind. We had a terrible story. I don't know if you know the story of Paraguay taking on Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay in 1864 to 1870. And I said to the president of Brazilian Congress, Paraguay has learned a lesson. On our own, no, never again. We'll follow a leader, because our size doesn't make us a leader yet. So the same thing with the U.S. The U.S. has to lead us for the free world to prevail. We're going to be behind, but we need strong indications. The U.S. cannot go yes, no, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Because then the ones who want to follow won't follow. Will be sold to the other. And as you are seeing now, there is a conflict in Ukraine. There are exercises in the China Sea. There are many points where conflicts could come. We need a strong leader who is a strong and committed, long-time friend of its friends. Paraguay has been by far one of the best allies of the U.S., and we're treated as if we didn't exist. We need to revert that, because those are shows that other people see. If you treat your ally as if it was not your ally, then why would I have an allegiance to you? My fourth point is fake news and not jumping too fast to adhere or say no to fake news, the fact-checking. Recently, in my country, we had two big debates. One debate had to do about a colleague of mine, a corrupt colleague of mine, Senator Gonzalez, who was expelled from our Senate by democratic and constitutional means, who cried out all over Latin America about the process. She went to the Supreme Court recently, and the Supreme Court said she had no merit, that was done properly. Some people who are prominent figures in Latin America jump to condemn us. That's not good. Shouldn't be repeated. The other thing, there was a big debate about the influence of our former president and president of our party, the party who is in power in Paraguay, Horacio Cartes, the influence that he has on the current president, who is Santiago Peña. Totally fake news. Totally fake news. I served under President Cartes with President Peña now as my colleague of Minister of Finance. And I can vouch before you that President Peña has total freedom to do whatever he pleases in terms of administrating the country. So please, in our region, we are all in the same boat. If something in Guatemala happens, I would like to have the phone of President Cerezo and say, President, is it true what they're saying about Tan? And I want you to have my phone. And I want to have the phones of all of you. And whenever somebody is going to speak about our country, let's check the facts. Because we are allies. Our region cannot move. What is the chance of Panama moving away from Colombia? No chance. We can't move. We need a strong leadership from the U.S. We are expecting that since the 50s. We need a direction that we can recognize, and that direction should not waver. And thank you again for inviting me. I hope I didn't bore you so much with petty issues, but I think these are the issues that count. Thank you very much.
See, you see now why I like this fresh politician who's very blunt, straightforward, and practical. No like a tap dancing. I mean, sometimes we have to speak about things we need to talk about. And especially when it comes down to what's happening in Washington, American leadership. I mean, we are having this wonderful timely event in Miami, but let me tell you, Washington, D.C., many of you have been to Washington. Washington, D.C. is very different from Miami. It's a very, strange town, right? So every 4 year, every 2 year, we have elections, and this year happens to be an important year too. But I think what Senator Leite, his right-on remarks, actually, it's a very good segue to our next speaker, Dr. Evan Ellis. He's very well-respected scholar, strategic thinker. So we're shifting our gears from former president, sitting senator, to somebody from Washington who can really kind of entertain us with his quick analysis on what's happening and what should be done as we move forward. Because what we are interested in is really present and future. Of course, past is important, but we want to have our conversation today a bit more forward-looking. So with that, Dr. Ellis, please.
First of all, let me say what an honor and a pleasure it is to be here in this event. I want to thank the Presidential Foundation and really recognize also just the distinguished company in which I am, the former presidents, distinguished guests, distinguished representatives from the Republic of China. Again, a great honor. Let me also emphasize that although I am currently the Latin America Research Professor with the U.S. Army War College, a civilian U.S. government employee, I am going to speak in my academic capacity and very frankly as such, but these are my opinions and not necessarily the opinions of the U.S. government. I feel honored by the words of Senator Leite. I respect the candor, and I think really it's an example of really what we need in the dialogue between the United States and our partners in Latin America, with which our country is connected by bonds of family, by bonds of geography, by bonds of security. What happens in the region intimately affects us, and even if we don't always recognize it in Washington, we very quickly find that the conditions become a matter of U.S. domestic policy and not just foreign policy. But the importance of having that dialogue in a respectful fashion and recognizing the importance of what's going on in the region, and really the question of, as we know, many of us in Latin America, the importance of doing the right thing, that oftentimes we know what that is, even if our governments don't do it or change back and forth with respect to what we do. I think that the difficulty of doing the right thing and doing the right thing consistently is a bond that unites Washington and Latin America. But let me, ironically, let me say, I would like to make 10 points very quickly to tie together the importance of Asia to China, Taiwan, and what's going on in Latin America, and Taiwan is a partner. So very quickly, let me get into the meat of this. Number one, important to recognize just how important what happens in Asia economically and politically is for not only the United States, but Latin America. $3.37 trillion of global trade passes through Asia. Asia-Latin American trade was $819 billion in 2022, and only a little over half of that is with continental China. As a matter of fact, when we think of partners like Japan, when we think of partners like Taiwan, when we think of partners like Korea, and also as my distinguished colleagues so well pointed out, it's not just the volume of trade, but companies like Foxconn, companies like TSMC, without the functionality of those companies and the country that underlies that functionality, we in Latin America and the rest of the world are gravely prejudiced in how our economy functions. But also, when we think about, we talk a lot about China, but also recognizing that the companies and activities of Japan, Korea, Taiwan for decades now, if we think of some of the good employers with good corporate social responsibility, on the Korean side, companies like Hyundai and POSCO. On the Japanese side, companies like Mitsubishi and Mitsui. If we think about, again, on the Taiwanese side, I already talked about TSMC and Foxconn. But also with respect to development support, the Japan International Cooperation Agency, Korea's counterpart KOICA, the Japan Development Bank, the ICDF of Taiwan. It is important for us with common interest to work all together in the interest of democracy and prosperity. It's not just Washington versus the People's Republic of China. Point number 3. The risk currently of war, not a probability, but the risk given what's at stake. As was mentioned, we're seeing things right now, the increasingly aggressive PRC behavior, Joint Sword 2024A. Frighteningly, that for the first time they named their intents to surround and intimidate the Republic of China. So by saying 2024A, it suggests that they're going to do it every year, and 2024A seems to imply that they're going to do it now multiple times a year. And it was 2 days after the inauguration of President Lai Ching-te. Very deliberate. We saw previous exercises after the visit of Nancy Pelosi, and then again in April 2023. We're seeing actions by the PRC against China in the Philippines, in the South China Sea, Second Thomas Shoal. We're reminded again and again how the PRC behaves when it believes it's powerful and it believes that it can take what it wants. The PRC tends to be a little bit more cautious in Latin America, but Latin Americans should look closely at how the PRC treats its neighbors as a reminder of what to expect once the PRC has the upper hand, whether in our economies or political system or otherwise, even if spoken with a delicate tone. And at the same time, it's not just the question of, will the PRC out of the box invade Taiwan? What worries me is that war by miscalculation, war by attempt to impose a blockade, et cetera. There's a lot of ways we can get there, and we've seen the dangers that poses. Point number 4, war would involve not only economically, but militarily, the Western Hemisphere in Latin America. The first 14 years of my career, I spent doing a lot of support for the Department of Defense, doing a lot of red teaming. And being in that position, to me it is absolutely unthinkable that my intelligent, innovative colleagues in the People's Liberation Army, I shouldn't say colleagues, but counterparts, would just allow the machine of the United States and Europe to come over to the Indo-Pacific like Saddam Hussein did in Iraq in the first Gulf War. If there is a global war over Taiwan or some other affair, it is unthinkable that the PLA and the security services, the MSS, et cetera, would not use their commercial presence as well as the military relationships that they are strongly building in order to disrupt and U.S. sustainment and deployment flows out of sensitive ports like Norfolk, sensitive ports like Jacksonville, out south, or the corridor from Los Angeles to San Diego on the West Coast, again with those proximate Chinese companies. It's unthinkable that the Panama Canal would not be plausibly shut down by some actor, that the presence that China has in the south of Argentina could not be used to observe and put at risk transits through the Straits of Magellan or the Drake Passage or other things. China's access to space, not only in places like Neuquén, but the projects in which, in places like Bolivia, they have trained the scientists that work in the primary and secondary facilities. They have put in the instruments in those places. They have a sympathetic government with a high probability of having access to those things that satellites like Tupac Katari has, like the 3 satellites that they've launched for Venezuela has, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and dual-use ports and other things. So the point is that while many in Latin America said, well, it's just about business, we don't want to involve ourselves in your great power competition, the involvement will happen, and the question is, what type of respectful dialogue do we have to anticipate what is at risk, especially if Taiwan finds itself at risk. Point number 5, if Taiwan were to lose a war, to lose their autonomy right now, the effect geopolitically would be transformative. Not only PRC confidence to move out elsewhere in the world with its engagement in Europe and elsewhere, but in naval terms, geostrategically, Taiwan is in many ways a buffer to the projection of power by the PLA Navy across the Pacific, to Guam, to Honolulu, to other places. And so I think what you would see is a transformation of what we have with China today. Point number 6, if there is a PRC advance in Latin America, that will have a significant impact on the boldness of the PRC in Asia. So right now, you have the geographically largest partner, Paraguay. And having just been in Paraguay and respecting just the admiral work, and frankly, President Peña and the work that he gets, I don't think gets enough respect and acknowledgement in Washington. I'm thoroughly in agreement with Senator Leite about that point. But I worry more about Guatemala, frankly. I worry that both on the left, some within the Semilla movement of President Arevalo, who I respect greatly, but also some on the right who find themselves a little bit corralled by the way, frankly, Washington has managed the transition in Guatemala. But you have people on both sides looking towards the prospect of moving towards the PRC. And it's interesting because if you look at the way the PRC has been advancing in Central America, very close to the United States, increasingly close to the United States, with the switch, the flip by Honduras, the flip by Nicaragua. And what you see is that it's no longer just about business. It's about military police training of the Nicaraguans in the PRC. It is about a series of strategic projects, including the Chinese development of the Dry Canal Corridor, which goes from, which would go from Santo Lorenzo in the Gulf of Fonseca in Honduras across to the Pacific, which would have synergy with what's happening with Nicaragua, the prospect of the Punta Huete Airport, and a prospect of a rail corridor in the future. That could make viable also the farther development, also by Chinese companies, of La Union in El Salvador, whose admirable president, Nayib Bukele, finds himself increasingly at odds with the United States. And so you have a confluence of Chinese projects, geopolitical influence, training of government organizations in a place, and if Guatemala adds to that, spanning from Atlantic to the Pacific, we have a geostrategic significant problem with the presence of the PRC and its companies in that region, and how that would potentially lead the PRC to act in the Indo-Pacific worries me. Point number 7, flips from Taiwan to the PRC is one of the fastest ways to rapidly advance the impact and role of the PRC. This happens because you get signing of lots of non-transparent MOUs, which open up different sectors like electricity. It creates possibility for training of government personnel in the PRC. It opens up the door to free trade agreements that, in the hopes of getting access to the Chinese market, end up opening up things to Chinese companies in one's own countries. And when you have that combination of things, again, one recognizes the way in which PRC personnel, it's interesting to see how quickly and how politically the advances in Nicaragua and in Guatemala, Nicaragua and Honduras are occurring right now. Number 8, switches have not benefited the local governments involved. I've followed China, Latin America's advance since the early 2000s. I've seen the evolution. I've seen the hopes of people such as respected President Oscar Arias at Costa Rica, who believed so much in the importance of the PRC for Costa Rica that only with himself and his brother and his presidential advisor, he conducted this year-long secret diplomacy. But at the end of the day, what Costa Rica got, especially after Intel decided to move away out of Costa Rica for their chip production to Asia, one found that, surprisingly, Costa Rica was able to sell almost none of its coffee and traditional fruit. Maybe a few shops through Café Burit, but that was more about coffee cups in China than coffee. But what you see again and again is there's reason for it. Number 1 is that the traditional products of many countries that are looking to change. There's a lot of hopes, but why would China, in a sustainable fashion, pay to import things in refrigerated containers going halfway around to the world, 45-day movement, when they can buy basically the same thing from the Philippines, from Thailand, and also when organizations like PROESA in the region in El Salvador do not have the experience nor the scale. So what you find is you have some boutique purchases to motivate the political hopes, but at the end of the day, if you look at the trade, and we don't have time to go into it, but the empirical relationship, once you lose the Taiwanese market, once you lose the Taiwanese technical help, you do not recover. The only things that you tend to get is a little bit of work done by Chinese companies with Chinese labor, and that do not leave behind sustainable infrastructure. Point number 9. Taiwan as a partner to the region. And again, this is the complement to point number 8. But when you look at the type of quality development projects, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in the agricultural field and other places, and as my colleague just alluded to, these are projects that actually, Taiwan has a political and economic as well as a moral interest in helping the region advance. And so you lose that when you lose Taiwan. You lose a company that is basically right-sized in terms of what Taiwanese companies look for from the market and what they're looking for in investing. And you lose the democracy. We talked about democracy. Does one really want one's police forces and one's journalists trained in the PRC in the style of journalism or in the style of police in the PRC? Or does one want one's forces trained collaboratively by a company which is democratic? Indeed, one would argue, with all respect to the DPP, so democratic that you have a country that is on the verge of being at risk of military intimidation by the PRC, that is, even in that context, in the name of democracy, looking to limit presidential powers. Taiwan is a partner. And the final point in which I heartily coincide with Senator Leite and my colleagues is the interest in greater U.S.-Taiwan collaboration and U.S.-Taiwan, Japan, other likewise democratic actor collaboration to see how can we work together to the prosperity of not only Taiwan, but our Taiwan recognizing countries, which are vital for democracy. It's vital that these countries succeed because through that success, you get the success of democracy. Through that success, you have greater stability in Asia and in Indo-Pacific. And through that collective success, we continue to try to maintain a world in which we stay farther away from war and closer to the economic development and development of democracy that benefits us all. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, look at this analytical entertainment. You never get this, other than this forum probably. But the 10 points, very extensive list of things we should consider, things we have to keep in mind to make things better, to move forward. I think Evan really kind of gave us very nice overview, rundown. And the bottom line, the strategic importance of Taiwan to many of us, and the importance of elevating that relationship. I think that was probably the bottom line message from Evan. Now, when we try to do something, it's not always top down. Sometimes we need a leadership. Many times we need a leadership. But when really good things, practical things are taking shape, taking place, we need a bottom-up approach, meaning we need a private sector. When we talk about investment, economic engagement, no matter how much good willingness you may have, without private sector engagement, without dynamic investment from our friends and partners, that's not going to happen. It may happen after long, long years, right? So our last speaker of this panel will go until about 10:45. We have about 20 minutes or so. So after our last speaker, I'm going to quickly introduce you to. We're going to have a small Q&A, but I want you to think about a few questions in your mind, if you have any. You may have some burning questions, then you should let me know. Our last speaker is coming from very specific, very special kind of field. Federico Sosa, a good friend of many of us, he was a former director of foreign direct investment, LADEX in Paraguay. So he's been dealing with a lot of private sector players and companies, folks in Taiwan and other countries. So it'll be very good for us to know what was happening when he was in charge of that agency, and what is happening, and what needs to be done as we try to move forward. With that, Federico, please.
Thank you, Anthony, and I will continue the salutations to the rest of the audiences. Very big shoes to fill, very impressive presentations. As Mr. Kim mentioned, I was the former director of Foreign Direct Attraction Investment of REDIEX, Paraguay's FDI and export promotion agency, but I was not the head of the agency, led one of its most important unit. But I want to recognize this is a very important public policy that was started many years ago, initiated by Minister Gustavo Leite back then, and pro-Paraguay. It was a public policy that continued for many years. And you do remember one of the lessons from the predecessors. You know, they would always tell you, it's very important who receives you at the airport, who you partner with, and what skin in the game they have with you. And I want to structure my presentation just like the gentleman before and also make a call to action. So I'll tell you a little bit about me, what the perspective of all the international investors we've been receiving in the past 4 years, around 2,500 to 3,000 accounts in many Taiwanese companies, and what we can do next, this crowdsourcing of ideas from the private sector. So a little about me, I've almost worked in different sectors, started out in the private sector in New York, worked in international law firms, worked in international NGOs and consultancies, worked with foreign embassies in Paraguay, but also worked in government with 2 different periods, with open government, convocating and participating with different government sectors, public society, and investors. So that was when I was called up to head FDI, because we could explain to foreign investors why it's a good idea to invest in Paraguay from different points of view. And investors want that. They want good partnerships, they want good opportunities, legal security, which Paraguay offers to all. And why is this important in the context that we're speaking with? Is that constantly there's this public assessment in the Paraguayan opinion how strong the Paraguay-Taiwanese relationship is, and based on how much Taiwan is investing in Paraguay, or how much Paraguay is exporting to Taiwan. Because the private sector in Paraguay, honestly, they evaluate the relationship with Paraguay and Taiwan, and also by the opportunity lost by not trading with continental China. Because one interesting fact that we need to know is that Paraguay's biggest importer country where we buy our goods from is continental China, but not necessarily the biggest export market where it's not allowed to sell directly. So why am I mentioning to this? Is because Paraguay is a very loyal and steadfast ally and friend of Taiwan and the society, and there's a high public opinion of that, but there are costs. And these costs are bared by the public Paraguayan companies, the Paraguayan entrepreneurs, of opportunities lost. But I say this is a willing cost that many are willing to take if they feel supported, that we can find and build bridges between both countries and also gain access to other markets that we've lost. So, I mean, that's why Senator Leite's presentation and the presentations before me really ring the bell, because Paraguay's done a lot to export its meat across the world. And right now, we've had the certification to export meat to the United States market, but we're seeing congressional initiatives to stymie that, just based on local politics. But look at us, we're giving up the Russian market, the Chinese market, and we sell to Taiwan as well, which has become a very big buyer of Paraguayan meat and poultry. And just because of local congressional politics, we might not be able to sell to the United States. So really, Paraguay's put in its dues, has worked very strongly, and it should deserve its recognition. Not only because of that, because if you look into Mr. Ellis's analysis, the potential war, according to some interpretations by some sources I've spoken with, has already started, in the sense things start earlier. They start in a silent fashion. So it's more cost-effective, it's more diplomatic, it's more wise to stand by your allies, make sure that Paraguay continues its recognition to Taiwan. And I just want to make a clarification of this. I'm currently in the private sector. I'm not representing any government. These are all my personal opinions. But this is a consensus of opinions I've been hearing from different private sector sources. And they feel, look, we should find ways to work together, because we're all better together if Paraguay continues recognizing Taiwan. And I think we will continue to do so in the near future. But in order to underpin that, we need to strengthen the economic and investment ties. That's why I make a call to action today to look and think creatively of new ideas to bring our countries together closely. Bearing in the recommendations of our former mentors of how to promote more investment, we need to train more Paraguayan lawyers and bankers to speak with Taiwanese investors, maybe speak in Cantonese Chinese, take advantage of the Paraguayan diaspora in Taiwan. And that's Mr. Layton mentioned sooner or later, sorry. It's very important to bring that diaspora back, and that's what's allowing Master Bus to actually invest in Paraguay in electric buses and mobility. Another idea that could be helpful down the road is to, make more bets in the Chamber of Commerces, relaunch the Paraguayan Taiwanese Chamber of Commerces and the mirror commerce in Taiwan. And maybe think about innovative financial funds, because we're always thinking about, okay, FDI, foreign direct investment, that's very key. But what about financial funds? What about promotion of green finance? Why not engage in so Taiwan can buy green carbon credits in Paraguay through very innovative projects that are currently on the road? So let's think creatively outside the box. That's what the private sector is asking of us, to build a sustainable relationship among both countries, to not let anything be settled for granted. Because the opportunity is right now. Paraguay is one of Taiwan's first line of defense with Guatemala and other countries. We should not allow Taiwan to be isolated. But we also have to understand the Paraguayan national interest is paramount. We need to have continued social and economic support for this. And that's why this type of events and forums and exchange of ideas is key. So we've tried in the last 4 years heavily to attract this Taiwanese companies. The Foxconn has been our paramount for us, but I see there's other opportunities there with artificial intelligence to bring Taiwanese companies and electronic manufacturers to Paraguay, taking advantage of the new opportunities. So really right now, I would also like to invite all of you to reconsider Paraguayan options and ally with Taiwanese and other Asian companies from Japan and South Korea who are actually analyzing opportunities in Paraguay as we speak. So if there's one key idea you can take away from all of this, that it's profitable and good business to invest in Paraguay, but substituting imports. Nearshoring. Instead of bringing things thousands of kilometers away, causing a lot of carbon credits and transportation expenses, they could be manufactured locally in Paraguay and exported profitably to very profitable markets in Brazil, Argentina, and South America. Just like Mexico does with the United States, Paraguay is the Mexico to Brazil. So we are nearshoring, Maquila powerhouse, and that's where we see opportunities in textiles, we see opportunities in electric buses, electronics, and I should wait for the ministry to formally announce its new industrial policy, but we've heard opportunities in biopharmaceutics, new advanced textiles, and why not reforestation and other products. So that is basically a wide, comprehensive summary of different points of view from different actors in the private sector. I myself been in the private sector for 2 months, taking advantage of these opportunities, but I still get in contact with a lot of suggestions from private actors and private sector investors, and they see the Paraguay-Taiwan relationship as a special one, and that's something that should be preserved, should be advanced, but it should be sustainable as well. That's why, I take the note of the predecessors who followed me and adhere to the call to action for more stronger leadership. And I think also that leadership, doing some internal retrospection, should come from Paraguay. I mean, let's think what Paraguay can do for Taiwan. I mean, what can we offer Taiwan as well? I mean, it should be a two-way relationship, and Paraguay has done a lot. So that's where I would take advantage of the breaks of this conference. So let's network, think of ideas, and maybe bear the fruits of institutions. Why not think about a Paraguay-Taiwan specialized investment and trade agency to address specific needs of Taiwanese investors? Because we understand every country is unique, and since this relationship is more than a unique, we might need to have to consider specialized institutions and agencies to take advantage of these opportunities. And just to close off, we had a really good experience in the last 4 years of organizing a specialized forum for electric mobility, which included Taiwanese investors, American investors, and Paraguayan investors. And a lot of things that we're seeing right now are a result of that coordination in the past. So let's think about trilateral or quadrilateral coordination mechanisms. And why not and let the private sector engage in this relationship between Taiwan and Paraguay in order to move forward. I'll be glad to answer any questions, and I'm very thankful for Anthony, for Thomas, and for the whole organization for having invited me at this forum. So thank you very much.
That was a very nice wrap-up. I don't think we have been giving you any headache. If you are suffering from any headache, let me know. I have some extra Tylenol. I can. But we've been having really a lot of stuff unpacking. So I want you to think about a few comments and questions if you may have. But I really want to reemphasize our panel this morning, this first panel. The first two speakers, basically, if this is an airplane, like a 30,000 feet altitude, what's happening, big picture, then we came down to Evan to talk about a few more specifics. And Federico actually gave us very nice landing. We now know what needs to be done, and it's a very good way to get into our second panel, which will be led by Olinda, our dear friend, to talk about strategic, geostrategic cooperation in a very unique field. So I think that you are really in for very exciting conversations this morning. With that, I'm just curious if there are any comments, questions from audience. Oh, I'm glad. I'll start with our dear friend, Mr. Drew Bond. I want to highlight Mr. Bond. He's not James Bond, he's Drew Bond, right? But as you can see, one of the partners here is...
He's related to James Bond.
Oh, you ask him directly, Senator. I don't know. I don't want to be killed. So there's a special organization in Washington, C3 Solutions. C3 Solutions is a very unique think tank in Washington, a great friend of Taiwan, and Paraguay, and many countries in South America. So he's also very much an entrepreneur and intellectual. So with that quick intro, Drew, please.
Can you hear me now? Perfect. Thank you, Anthony, for that kind words and introduction. Thank you, Tom, for putting this on and allowing us to participate. And it's really a delight to be here and meet so many distinguished leaders and old friends and new friends. Anthony, you promised us some practical, tangible solutions. And we have solutions in our name. We're very focused on what can we do. And so as I go back to Washington today, I'm increasingly informed and perhaps concerned about where our geopolitical relations stand and perhaps some fragile surfaces. The U.S. is steadfast in its commitment to Taiwan. I believe we're steadfast in our commitment to Paraguay and many partners in the U.S., but we're not always steadfast in certain commitments. So as you mentioned, Senator Lete, it's been back and forth on the beef situation, for instance. So I guess my question is, what can we do to shore up and further strengthen our relations so that Paraguay in particular, but also our Latin American neighbor friends, understand that when the U.S. is a committed ally, we are a committed ally?
Thank you, Drew. Very practical question. It's always about finding this kind of practical action items. I think that's the beauty of any kind of conference and forum and dialogues. We are not here just to talk about, maybe kind of ideas. I think that's a very good question, Drew. I want to convey that question to Senator Lete and Dr. Evan Ellis, perhaps very quickly. I mean, you two gentlemen already alluded some of the dimensions to Drew's question, but anything you would like to add very quickly, Senator and Dr. Ellis? Let's see how it goes, but you can be very concise as well.
We started with President Peña a different way of diplomatic relationship. We decided we will not let the embassy in Asunción tell Washington what happens in Paraguay. So we've been 3 times already in Washington, D.C., and we will continue to do so. I'm trying to get close or integrate a group of legislators, congressmen, senators, who are interested in a funny story of a small country that has sustained everything to being the best U.S. ally in the region that never pays, that the U.S. has never paid recognition to. Not only did they pay recognition, they interfered our elections just recently. And that's not the way we do democracy in the real world. So creating a strong interparliamentary group. We understand that Washington changes every 4 or 8 years in terms of the executive, and each executive may change or not, but the Congress is more stable, is the voice of the American people, and we're doing efforts, and I hope that sooner than later, we will have an interparliamentary group that we will have a consensus on how to move forward, on how to protect this relationship, on how to foster the relationship. And I'm also hoping that Heritage is going to be part of that group. We have set our diplomacy as to a 5-star: Washington, Asunción, Taipei, Jerusalem, Brasilia, Buenos Aires. Those are our centers. That's where we should gravitate. That's where we should be, because that's where our main interests are. And we do it from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we do it from the legislators. I currently am the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee at our Senate, and my job is to be with senators, with congressmen, talking about Paraguay, creating alliance with Paraguay, creating awareness about Paraguay, creating dedicated group to having Paraguay as one of the best U.S. allies.
Thank you, Senator. I think that's actually perfect, because when we think about this November 5, we're so much consumed by the fact that there will be a presidential election. That is very true. But let's keep in mind, here in this great country, November 5, people will be electing new senators, new members of House of Representatives. So we will have a new Congress for sure after November 5. So having this kind of forward-looking conversation, what we can do in terms of interparliamentarian exchanges, not only just between Asunción and Washington, D.C., but with Taipei and perhaps other countries too, so that we can create some kind of triangular partnership. I think that can be a practical step moving forward, in terms of elevating our partnerships. Dr. Ellis, anything you want to add?
Absolutely. Sure. A couple things. First of all, the frustration that we as part of democracies often feel, and I think this is something that my Latin American counterparts and others understand very well, the difference between knowing what needs to be done and getting there. And one of the great things or bad things about democracy is that dictatorships will tell you what you want to hear, like the PRC, and then will do whatever is in their own interest, regardless of what they told you. Democracies will tell you lots of different things and leave you frustrated where there are. Dictatorships will do things very quickly and in very engaged fashion, but maybe the wrong thing that is very prejudicial. Democracies will flail around trying to figure out what to do, but at the end of the day, there is the possibility to motivate them to get to do the right thing. And so when I look at this vitally important situation with the relationship with Taiwan, with the relationship with Paraguay and others, to me, it's about the power of strategic concepts to inspire. I remember seeing the evolution of the U.S. relationship with Colombia. Back in the 90s, it wasn't always clear that Colombia would become one of the closest U.S. strategic partners. I mean, sure, there was that little bit about strategic geography, Atlantic, Pacific, Panama, near Panama, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it was real people. It was the Colombian ambassador in Washington, D.C., Luis Alberto Moreno. It was the power of Colombia to capture the imagination and define itself as a strategic priority, building on the realities. I see Paraguay in the same situation. I see Guatemala in the same situation. I see others in the same situation. I see, frankly, Taiwan in the same situation. In the Paraguayan case, it's Paraguayan central strategic geography. In the Guatemalan case, it's the Atlantic Pacific bicoastal central geography in Central America, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, I talked about the importance of Taiwan in Asia. And so for me, it's the power of ideas, whoever comes into power in Washington, D.C. in November, of understanding why is the survival of Taiwan so important? Why is the success of a free market, committed democratic government in Paraguay so important? Why is the success of democracy in Guatemala so important? Why is it so important for the United States to get the resources behind those countries to make sure that they triumph and what they represent triumph? And so I think it's how do we work together to really define in a compelling fashion the strategic concept that resonates in the region, that resonates with the American people as those decision makers shape policy. So I think that, in my mind, is the key. And one last thing, and taking advantage of the fact that you are doing, your company is doing a lot of very interesting work in green energy. One of the things that I think is one of the strategic challenges and something that Paraguay plays a key role is the question of climate. And climate is not something that is just the province of the left. The question is, for example, I got part of my own start in trying to explain to DoD decision makers why this economic thing that had to do with the engagement by the PRC was strategically important with military implications for 20-odd years of my career. I see climate as that same thing. We are in a transition in terms of how value added is created in the global economy, the electrification of the global economy. What are the dominant technologies? Who owns the things that connect us together and make our economies function? And just like in the 19th century and the 20th century with maritime issues, who owns those technologies? Who owns that connectivity? Who sets the standards? Who realizes the value added in the new energy economy will determine in part what the rest of the 21st century looks like. And so the question of making wise strategic choices will have a lot to do with our future strategic position. And when you look at the green energy potential of countries like Paraguay, and then the ability to define and get right, making sure that we do not cede the green energy space to companies like the PRC. Getting that strategically right is a vital part of being in a strategically powerful, dominant position as the U.S. and then the region goes forward.
Thank you, Evan. So I really think that this is a really constructive and forward-looking conversations we're having. Last but not least, oh, I didn't see the conversations we're having. Last but not least,
good morning, everybody. Thank you, I guess, the panel. My name is Christian Guerrier. I'm a son of Haiti, the first man who got the honor to serve on Miami's Commission on the Status of Women. And I just have a comment for President Jorge, in regards to democracy, free press, and economic development. And I think you mentioned Venezuela, the challenges that Venezuela is facing, and how democracy and free press, and you mentioned also Simon Bolivar being kind of this figure. But one of the things I think you probably felt, maybe you weren't aware, is that Simon Bolivar took 2 trips to Haiti for advice. So I think Haiti has a significant mission and a significant role to play and democratize the Western Hemisphere. And I think when we were established, it was with that vision, and Haiti being the second independent nations in Latin America and the Americas. And I think it's critical that we put Haiti in the conversation and learn so we can, all of us, culturally engage to really make a kind of greater impact and a greater economic development. That's my input. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Davey Carcason. I'm an attorney. I do international arbitration, investment law, in terms of investor-state dispute settlement. I have a question regarding the relationship, and it's also a comment regarding the relationship between Taiwan and Paraguay, and the differentiation with the relationship between the United States and Paraguay. Taiwan and Paraguay entered a bilateral investment treaty in 1992. And knowing your comment that you mentioned that Paraguay is one of the oldest allies of the United States, but yet there's no bilateral investment treaty between the United States and Paraguay. Why is this happening? Because in the end of the day, we're trying to develop some economical development over time, attracting investors for both countries for coming to one another and ensuring their securities and their rights, but yet there's no BIT. Meanwhile, Paraguay and Taiwan has a strong BIT that's been enforced since 1992.
That's actually an important question we've been pondering about. We are not far from you, but I'll let maybe Federico answer that just briefly, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you for the question. That's a very good question, and I do remember we used to parcel out our responsibilities with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Industry and Commerce in my former position, but I did participate in what was the last TIFA, the Trade Investment Finance Talks. I'm trying to, draft an answer for you, but if anybody else wants to comment, I understand that there is currently not an investment treaty agreement because it's probably one of the end goals of the ongoing U.S.-Paraguay economic relationship. And that would be, basically there was a lot of issues regarding IP issues in the past, intellectual property. But I could be wrong there. I know it's something that's being discussed heavily, and it would be more in the purview of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I mean, we're more on the operational side, working with investors. I don't know, Senator Leite, you want to comment on that, or anybody else who knows? I would be, misspeaking if I told you the exact answer for that. But we can get back to you, of course, and give you that.
And it seems a little bit embarrassing on the United States' part that there's no such BIT, knowing that Paraguay has such a strong relationship.
Correct.
And attracting investors is what countries needs to do, because that's what develop economy. And in the end of the day, investors are looking up to the BIT to make sure their rights are being protected. So it's very, very interesting that such relationship was established in 1992, but yet the United States is not there.
Yeah, but it's not a new issue. I mean, obviously, people in Washington, we've been actually thinking about and advocating it, but I think Senator Leite laid out earlier, we need a leadership from Washington, D.C., we need a leadership from Asuncion too, but I think this issue, because this is a bilateral investment treaty, this issue has to come from Washington, D.C., and we'll be working on it. Perhaps this is an agenda. We can all work together. You already raised a very good voice and good question. So I think we should work on this as we go. But I think this November election and going forward, let's see what kind of leadership we will have in Washington, D.C. Mr. President, you will have a final comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, quick comments. Appreciate your comment on Haiti. Yes, Simon Bolivar got his inspiration in your country, and he gave freedom and sovereignty to 5 Andean countries and the name to mine. So thanks for hosting him and inspiring him. I want to make a comment vis-a-vis the U.S. role, and my concern, quite frankly, is not whether in the U.S. there will be a consensus to bash China. That is there. From AOC to Marjorie Taylor Greene, you have a consensus in the U.S. on being tough on China. My concern is Latin America, quite frankly. When you come from my part of the world, you always get asked every election, who do you prefer, Republicans or Democrats, Bush or Gore, or Obama or Romney? Typical question. I always say 2 things. One is, I don't want to pick presidents in your country, don't come pick presidents in mine. Paraguay perhaps understands a little bit of that. And my second part of the answer is, may I have a blender, please? Because generally speaking, through history, the last few decades, Republicans were more open to our products, not our people. Democrats were more open to our people, not our products. So I was asking for a blender where we could have a vital center to do trade and migration. And lo and behold, we've got a blender where there's consensus that they don't want our people or our products, generally. And it's not just Trump, by the way. There is no way that you can get, no matter how the November election turns out, that you can get a free trade agreement, say the Mexican agreement revamped for Ecuador, Peru, Uruguay has tried, and there's no way that you can get it through. That is a structural concern that I have. Because then you hear, no, don't deal with China. And here comes Uruguay. Lacalle Pou is the last person on earth who would be a sympathizer of the Chinese Communist Party. But he wants to sell milk, he wants to sell wine, he wants to sell beef. And if China's open for business and the US is not, or Europe is not, then those things will tend to evolve. Second comment on the US on green energy. I come from a part of the world that is going to be very important in the next few decades. Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, we have 60% of the world's lithium. Lithium is very important. How many lithium batteries do you think I have in my room here? 9. Between the cell phones, the Kindles, the iPads, the iPods, the earphones, and what have you. 9. I don't have a car yet. But a lithium battery is a tennis match. On one side, you have the Iranian racket, the Ayatollah, Khomeini, cobalt, manganese, nickel. On the other side, you have Djokovic, or maybe he's retiring, I don't know, Alcaraz, graphite. And lithium is a tennis ball that goes back and forth on the charge and discharge. China is the king of this tennis match. They're refining between 63 and 92% of the cobalt, the nickel, the manganese, the graphite, and the lithium. So if we want to move to a green, clean world, you're going to be extremely dependent on China when it comes to lithium batteries and EVs, unless you go to the South American triangle and say, I want to start doing the refinery and the battery manufacturing here in South America. And I want to bring Foxconn, and don't just make them in Shenzhen, come down to South America and start working on the green part in our part of the world. The last comment quickly, because as it naturally befits this conversation, a lot of emphasis on my neighbor, Paraguay, Guatemala. If I was the U.S. government and migration is a top issue, and criminality and cocaine coming through is a top issue, I would go all in on Guatemala. All in. You will never find what is, maybe not very experienced, but a clean president that was miraculously elected, Vinicio Bernardo Arevalo, who runs a country that goes from the Pacific to the Atlantic and is the doorway to the doorway for the drugs and the people that are coming through. Before they get to Mexico, the cocaine or the people have to go through Guatemala. So you could create a buffer of prosperity that prevents the drugs and the people from moving forth. And you have a government that is a clean leader who's aligned with Taiwan, who speaks Hebrew, by the way. So instead of just saying, here's $50 million, I would say, here's $2 billion, I'll build a buffer, and I'll make Guatemala a beacon of prosperity, and that way you have a zone that will create a containment to the problems that are going to dominate the campaign and the debates. I'm not trying to be Ambassador Guatemala to the U.S., but if I was, that would be my point when it comes to this election. Okay, Olinda, now you know Olinda can be the Guatemalan ambassador. She can come get all the money, and we all have the next event in Guatemala. Thanks.
Excellent. Wonderful and excellent. I think we just ran out of time, so we'll just wrap it up. But I just want to thank President Quiroga, Senator Leite, Dr. Ellis, Mr. Sosa. What a wonderful, candid, straightforward conversations we had. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.